Good evening. I'm Mary Watson, Executive Dean of the Schools of Public Engagement, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you all here tonight for this event, Creating an Inclusive Economy, Pathways for Impact Entrepreneurs. Before I make some brief remarks, I just want to take a moment to pause and recognize the horrific events of last evening in Las Vegas, and to ask that we hold those families and communities in our thoughts. It's a horrific moment in time, and sadly, these events seem to be happening all too often. So I wanted to recognize those and any of you who have family, friends, or others involved. Our thoughts are with you. So for those of you who know the history of the New School, founded in 1919, you know that this university was formed nearly 100 years ago under the purpose of creating a new kind of university that would be focused on the integration of a variety of fields, art and design, management and policy, media, creative writing, and more. And at that time, the founders of the New School had left what they called the Old School to form the university in part because of an act of protest against signing a loyalty oath during the rising World War I period. In the 1930s, we had a unit of the New School which was then known as the University in Exile, which welcomed scholars from across mostly Europe who were facing persecution and rising fascism in Europe. And this was a very significant moment in time for the New School as well. These used to seem like or feel like historical moments, but in the recent times, in the last few weeks or few months or last year or so, some of those same conditions that are so difficult are alive and well in our environment now. And the New School remains poised to act in ways that are going to create positive social change amidst the most pressing problems that we're facing. So now today, we have world-class programs in art and design, social research, professional and applied public policy, urban policy, media studies, creative writing, and in the liberal arts and performing arts. And what you may not know is that all along this 100-year history, many students studied management and leadership and entrepreneurship. And tonight's event is really about building and enhancing one's ability to bring about entrepreneurial change. So we now have a university-wide initiative that we're calling Management at the New School. And in this initiative, we're bringing together the management, leadership, and entrepreneurship programs that we teach across the university. So we have programs that include strategic design and management at Parsons, fashion management at Parsons, nonprofit, change management, media management, sustainability management in the area of the schools that I oversee, and a newly launched program in arts management and entrepreneurship in the College of the Performing Arts. So why are so many students interested in management and entrepreneurship? They're interested in that because they want to bring together design and systems thinking to experiment and iterate, to develop skills, to evolve industries, to be bold and imaginative, and most importantly, perhaps, to foster empathy and resilience in society. Tonight's event is part of a long legacy of entrepreneurial work at the New School. And I'm very happy to share tonight that the Kauffman Foundation has recognized our work on this front and thus has generally supported us with an inclusion grant to expand our work. Under the leadership of Associate Dean Michelle Kahani, who will be your facilitator tonight, we have launched this initiative to support early-stage entrepreneurs through their course of study at the university. Tonight is the official launch of that event, and we're very excited to bring that forward. Now, I see some familiar alumni faces in the audience. The Impact Entrepreneurship is the next progression of what we have called the New Challenge, a social innovation competition in which more than 800 of you have participated over the last 5 years. This has been a very exciting development to move it to Impact Entrepreneurship because instead of prizes or awards at the end of the curriculum, we'll be bringing in fellows next year in entrepreneurship to be able to begin their graduate degree programs with these entrepreneurial measures in mind. So I want to take a moment to name some of the individuals who have built this legacy of entrepreneurial work and entrepreneurship. Some of them are here in the room tonight. So let me recognize Charles Allison, Dennis Derrick, Rhea Alexander, Dave Carroll, Cynthia Lawson, Jen Vandermeer, Diana Tan-Shanker, Elizabeth Werby, and more, and Chris Castano, who chairs our advisory board for the work he's done in collaboration with this initiative. So tonight, I know we're here to celebrate the future of work, to think about how to make that work more inclusive, and to be creative and innovative and imaginative in the ways we're going to address pressing challenges. We're going to work together, and we're going to shape a new inclusive economy, and it starts tonight here. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Provost Tim Marshall.
Thank you, Mary. And I just want to add also my sorrow and horror of what happened at Las Vegas. As you might tell, I'm from Australia. We had a very similar thing happen a number of years ago where 35 people were murdered in a very similar circumstances. The big difference is the gun laws changed immediately afterwards, and there's never been an incident like it in the last 15 years. So, something to remember. Anyway, back to where we are tonight. I'm really delighted to welcome you to create an inclusive economy. Inclusion and diversity, as Mary has just been pointing out, are at the heart of the New School and its commitment to social justice. We are a university where design and social research work together to address today's biggest challenges. And it's not just coincidental. This is the generative and the propositional with the critical and the deep understanding. And those two areas working together, I think, is exactly what the world needs at this point. Where students learn through doing, becoming effective change agents in a world that increasingly demands better designed products and services, more equitable systems, and innovative organizations. The Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative is a wonderful example of these values and of our commitment to working across disciplines to achieve these ends. We continue to build, and are building right now, world-class faculty in management, leadership, and entrepreneurship, and some of our new faculty are here tonight, I know, joining our wonderful existing faculty, so welcome again to all of them. Our faculty are practitioners and scholars who are exploring critical questions that contribute to building an inclusive economy, including environmental justice, digital equity, reproductive rights and food justice, responsible supply chain practices, socioeconomic stratification, inclusive leadership practices, retirement security, new forms of organizing work, such as platform cooperativism, which I think you'll hear more about, and of course, impact entrepreneurship. Our students are leading the way in creating the companies and organizations of tomorrow, responding to the many critical challenges we face. Over the past few years, we've been hosting a social innovation ideas competition, aka New Challenge, that has attracted more than 800 participants. Students have submitted ideas for organizations, ventures, or programs that address a range of complex social and environmental challenges. Some examples of these include educating girls about STEM, providing formerly incarcerated youth on-ramps to employment, bringing access to technology to rural India for improved education, creating fashion for those with physical disabilities, and many, many more. We strive to this approach in our practices, in our own policies and actions as a university in the world. For example, we've made a commitment repeatedly for diversity and inclusion, and in early September we publicly disagreed with the administration's decision to end the DACA program, and we uphold our right not to disclose any person's citizenship or immigration status or to cooperate with immigration authorities in their efforts to do so. We're also one of the first universities to divest our endowment portfolio of carbon-based companies. The Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative, which is being launched today, is an effort by faculty and staff across the university to leverage all of our assets across multiple schools and programs on behalf of students who want to create positive change through entrepreneurship. And I'd like to particularly recognize, as I think Mary did as well, the Impact Entrepreneurship Steering Committee members, whose names are listed in your program, so I won't read them out, and who are helping to build the ecosystem for innovation and entrepreneurial development at the New School. You'll learn more about Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative from Elizabeth Werby later in the program. In the meantime, I would like now to hand the mic over to Michelle Kahani, the Associate Dean, Educational Innovation and Social Engagement, Professor of Practice, and the Faculty Director for the Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative. Michelle has done a remarkable job over many years keeping this torch alive and building it into this great community of faculty and practitioners and partnerships, students and alumni. I know many of you are here tonight, and it's really, there are many faculty involved, but Michelle's been an absolute leading light in doing this. So thank you, Michelle. You've made the university a much better place for all the work you're doing, so thank you. So she's going to come here now and provide our insights. Thank you.
So welcome, everyone. It's great to see you, and it's great to see a lot of familiar faces, alumni included. Thank you for being here. And thank you for the faculty who actually brought their classes as well, which is really wonderful. So I'm just going to say some really quick remarks, and we'll get going. So we, as noted, live in a strange time, and we live in a time of transitions. Between technological change and social upheaval, the next decade will transform the way we work, the way we create, the way we consume, and the way we learn. To navigate this time of change, we'll need new strategies to ensure that we will all thrive. And our guests here tonight are really leading the way and are exemplary in trying to innovate to create those strategies for inclusion. America's demographics, as an example of this issue of inclusion, are rapidly changing. 43% of millennials are people of color, and in about 2044, it's estimated that Americans will become a majority people of color nation. Women constitute 47% of the workforce and earn more college degrees now than men. However, there's a discrepancy. There's still a long way to go before we see true inclusion. People of color and women are still underrepresented in major fields with higher salaries, like in the STEM fields, for example. Women-owned businesses only account for 30% of all businesses in the US. And according to the last census, minority-owned firms accounted for approximately 29% of all US firms. So we have a ways to go before we experience true inclusion in this country. Whether in the United States or globally, companies and organizations of all kinds will need, in order to remain relevant, will have to deal with this question of inclusion through new business models, new business practices, new career pathways for women and people of color. Our panelists represent a cross-section of impact entrepreneurs who are creating the companies and organizations that are specifically focused on creating an inclusive economy. There are two themes in this panel that I just want to pull out so that it begins to have some coherence for you. One is the fact that all of our panelists are founders. Many of them are serial founders of companies and organizations. They represent the best of an entrepreneurial spirit that is focused on social impact. Secondly, we'll be exploring very diverse strategies for creating an inclusive economy. Some of our panelists are focused on questions that are really related to workforce and talent. Others are focused on issues of how do you increase capital access for our women who are entrepreneurs. And then finally, we're looking at the question of social capital and natural capital and resources and access to them with a specific focus on food systems and food security. So quite a diverse range of approaches and focus areas, but all of them are specifically focused on how do we create the structures or remove the hindrances that get in the way of creating true inclusion here in this country and globally. So I'd like to introduce you to this fabulous panel. First, just come up as I introduce you, and we'll get started in a moment. It's Natalia Alberti Noguera, who's the founder and CEO of Pipeline Angels, and also the host of Pitch Makeover. Porter Braswell, who is the co-founder and CEO of Jopwell. Christina Sass, who is the co-founder and president of Andela. And Dennis Derrick, who is the founder of the Corbin Hill Food Project and our esteemed professor at Milano, the School of International Affairs, Management, and Urban Policy. So we'll get underway. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here, and some of you know each other, and you'll get to know each other better. And if you have questions of each other, you just stop me, and you can start moderating the panel yourselves. But so I'd like if you could just each just quickly tell us what does your organization do? And we'll then get underway and get much deeper, but just so people kind of get a sense of who's who on the panel. Natalia, can I ask you to start?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. Good. Are you ready? Yes. Okay. My name is Natalia Oberti Noguera. I am Nakis Nakis on Twitter, so if you're live tweeting, remember the Twitter handle. I'm an LGBTQ, Latina, queer. My gender pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder and CEO of Pipeline Angels. And what we do at Pipeline Angels, we have two super simple goals. The first one is to change the face of angel investing, and the second one is to create capital for women and non-binary femme social entrepreneurs. So anyone identifying with womanhood, cis, trans, third gender is encouraged to apply. And we really are the friends and family round for entrepreneurs who don't have friends or family to fund their businesses. In terms of my other title that might be up there, I haven't checked. I'm also the creator and host of Pitch Makeover, which is a podcast on startups, investing, pitching, and more voices. And the way that we define more voices for the podcast is women, non-binary people, and men of color. And I'm super thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Porter Braswell, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Jopwell. And Jopwell is a career advancement platform built specifically for the most underrepresented groups in corporate America, which we define to be Black, Latino, Hispanic, and Native American. We focus on both students and professionals. We launched the company about 2.5 years ago, and there's 30 of us working now for the company. We're right down the street on 14th between 5th and 6th, and it's been a lot of fun.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Sass. I'm co-founder and president of Andela. Andela is founded on the belief that brilliance is evenly distributed, and we find extraordinary tech entrepreneurs and software developers in emerging markets starting in Africa. And so we've got about 500 software developers between Lagos and Nairobi and Kampala, and we place them as full-time software developers in growing companies around the world. Our developers are with us for 4 years as they incubate and radically improve the quality and innovation of those tech teams by being an incredibly diverse force and really an expert in emerging markets that's added to that team. So they do that for about 4 years while they're with us. And then our long-term goal is to really catapult their career path forward as entrepreneurs in their home communities, as leaders in their own tech communities. That's Andela.
Good evening. I'm Dennis Derrick, founder of Corbin Health Food Project, and 7 years in the making. And our mission is a fairly simple one, getting food to those who need it most. But the simpler you have these missions, the more difficult you find it to be. It's just a means to an end, because in the long run, what we're particularly interested in around our vision is the idea of sovereignty, the idea of racial equity, and also, most important, the shifting of power in the decision-making around what goes on in the food arena.
Thanks, everybody. So I'd like to start with more of your personal journey of how you got to where you are right now, not all the way from, well, wherever you want to start, but what brought you into the world of entrepreneurship and particularly your company? Christina, why don't you start? Yeah.
Sure. How long do y'all have?
1 hour.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of really pivotal moments and influencers in my path. So let me try to be brief. My father immigrated to the United States when he was 22. He came with a suitcase and $200. And a company invested in him and believed in him and sent him back to school and gave him time and some resources to really be able to further himself because they saw his grit and persistence and drive. And he really hammered that home in only the way that a true German can, that that education and that our dedication to our own education, specifically to education that led to a career path that prepared us for a career, would define the richness of our lives. And that never quite left me And so I was a passionate educator in my early career, but I would say a very idealistic educator. So, I took all of that passion and decided to apply it to creating the best possible education systems for young people in Clark County, Georgia, which is one of the most persistently poor counties in the southeast, and then in the Palestinian territories, in Nablus, then also in Kenya and in southeastern China, where I helped to build a school there. And after meeting hundreds and hundreds of young people in each of those radically different situations, they all had a very similar complaint, which was that it didn't matter how passionate they were and how much drive they had, they still could not just get a good job, that their education systems did not prepare them. And so the more I looked into that, it's just abundantly clear that in many, many cases we are failing our young people. We are failing to connect them with career paths. We're failing to bring employers into the education systems to say, everyone is exhausted of hearing we need 2 years experience. Like, how do we bridge that exact gap? How do we do that? So I refocused my entire career path on that, on forcing education systems to prepare young people for market opportunities that are available right now to them, that are realistic to them right now. And that led me through many different organizations and many different ways to attack that problem. Andela, however, is it's my life's work. It is, I hope it doesn't sound arrogant to say, but we hold ourselves accountable for the selection of the people with that grit and persistence, and also employers and their exact needs. And so we are closing the loop between the education system and the employment system. And I did that by finding other entrepreneurs that were solving very specific pieces of that problem. I knew Africa. I'd worked there for about 5 years before starting this. I knew the absolutely extraordinary talent. We went out looking for not just pools of jobs in the thousands, but pools of jobs in the hundreds of thousands and millions. Last year in 2016, 1.6 million open jobs for software developer in the United States alone. And so we said, this can be solved. It's the only time in human history where we can use this crazy thing called the internet to be able to, really provide talent wherever it is to those companies in need, to those organizations in need. And so we set out with that hypothesis in 2014, and we're 770 employees in 4 countries later. So it's been quite a journey. That's the short version.
Thank you. Porter, can we hear a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, so my journey. Okay, my journey starts off, I grew up in the type of household where to be successful, you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer, you can go into finance, and that was it. I'm from New Jersey originally, and I got fortunate enough to go to a boarding school called Lawrenceville for high school. And at the time, Morgan Stanley was offering a diversity internship program for high school students. And somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, you qualify for this, you should probably apply. And knowing that it was this word called finance, I was like, okay, I'm going to apply and kind of see what happens. And got lucky, got the job, and started working there my junior and senior summers in high school. Went on to Yale, played basketball there, and instead of playing basketball in the summers, I continued in a really diversity-heavy finance early access pipeline and spent 3 summers interning at Goldman Sachs and started my career there. And I was there for 3 years buying and selling currencies. And so from the age of 15, all I really knew was finance, and that was just what I was exposed to. I was incredibly fortunate and really blessed to have that opportunity, but I knew it wasn't normal, and I knew that it was luck. And so while my day-to-day job was buying and selling currencies, I would still assist with diversity recruiting efforts because I was passionate about it, and it was a product of, it's got me to where I was. And so knowing the inefficiencies and how companies were going about diversity recruiting, in particular the recruitment of Black, Latino, Hispanic, and Native Americans, I thought it had to be kind of disrupted and really rethought. And knowing that really all companies in all different industries faced similar challenges when it came to recruiting people of color. And historically, they relied a lot on nonprofits where they coach and trained and mentored, and to some degree force-fed diversity, which could lead to terrible retention. And so I figured you can apply technology to this space, create a place online where people of color can create profiles and really share their story and and share who they are, and which is more than just a resume, of course, and leverage technology to do mentoring at scale. And if we can build that, we can bring companies on the other side and directly connect with them. And so we set out to do that about 2.5 years ago, and that was my path to it. But similarly to Christina, doing my life's work. And it's incredibly fortunate and humbling to be able to do that at such an early age and kind of use your life experiences to kind of piece it all together and see how it plays out. But, you know, I'm 29 and there's nothing else I'd rather be doing. I can't foresee doing something else, and I'm just really fortunate to be building something that leads with making impact, but it's also a pretty sound business, and so that was my pathway.
Well, I'll be brief, because at 77, my pathway's been a long one. And I would really just kind of highlight three incidences that shaped me. This sounds like the Sunday morning program. Krista Tippett, what are the values that you have, and what shaped you as a youth? And so I will talk about, how many people in this room know who Paul Robeson is? How many people? Okay. Well, Paul Robeson, at the age of 9, I was living in Trinidad, born in Trinidad, and I wanted to hear this great baritone singer from the United States, Paul Robeson. And I had to walk 8 miles, and my mother said, "You want to go listen to him? Go listen to him." So I walked the 8 miles to Paul Robeson, came back home that evening, and couldn't understand why this person of color, with this incredible voice, was being thrown out of the United States and didn't have a passport, and they were taking away his visa and all of these types of things, and citizenship. And my mother simply said to me, "You will learn about it as you grow up." And then later on, when I came to the United States, the first real piece that sort of shaped where I was going, or made me convinced I was not going to stay in this country, was the Sunday when those young girls were bombed in the church in Birmingham. And I knew at that particular point what this whole concept of justice was all about. Linking Paul Robeson, linking to that Sunday morning in Birmingham, and telling my mother that I was not going to ever stay in this country. And so by the age of 24, when I'd finished all my work for my PhD, the only job that was really available for me was being a dishwasher at Horn and Hardart. Anybody around here old enough to remember them? Okay, where all the homeless people really hung out. Okay, there are a few people my age in this room. And then something happened. I ran into, and some of you must know about Little Rock and the Little Rock 9, and the fact that they just celebrated the 60th anniversary of those kids going through school in Little Rock, Arkansas. I met Ernie Green, and Ernie Green and myself became partners, and he was trying to get blacks and Latinos into the construction union. And I wasn't moved by it until he said to me, "You know, we're working with Sheet Metal Worker 28, and in 79 years of its history, they have never, ever admitted someone black or Latino." And I says, "Damn, I don't believe that. I cannot walk away from this challenge." And so 3 years later, after we cracked the exams, and NYU took me to court, and you name the whole thing, and the union spent about $1 million, we were able to start something called the Workers' Defense League, the Joint Apprenticeship Program. And then I began to understand that almost everything I was going to do then on was going to be related to social justice. So most people are always asking me, "When are you going to retire?" And I said, "How do you retire from social justice issues?" And so 7 years ago, the issue of Corbin Hill, and the fact that when you take a look at the mortality rates in Harlem, it wasn't about drugs. It really wasn't about the crime. It wasn't about HIV. It was really about food and food disparities. And so out of that, sitting on a group called West Harlem Environmental Justice Group, on the board of there, I began to learn an awful lot about food, and I said, this is the issue that I want to finish up with. And that's how I got involved in Corbin Hill.
Thank you. So I have 3 aha moments. The first one, well, how many people are Latinx in this room? Are you Latinx? Some of us are here. Yes, more voices. So I grew up predominantly in Latin America, even though the first place I ever lived was New Jersey. And, you know, Colombia, Ecuador, Honduras, Dominican Republic. And I don't remember ever really meeting someone and being introduced to them and being told, so-and-so is a founder, so-and-so is an entrepreneur, so-and-so is a CEO. So when I went to college, I really didn't have the language to realize that being an entrepreneur was a possibility. And I actually went to Yale as well, so we'll talk about that later. And Silman, although I want to switch to polyamory, and we'll talk about that too. And so what I like to say is, like, I doubled in economics and comparative literature. I actually majored in extracurriculars. I accidentally produced a TV show for the college TV station. I published a student-run magazine. And I didn't know that what I was doing was being entrepreneurial. Had this idea, assembled a team, executed, had a product, had a concept. And so one of my favorite quotations is actually from Marian Wright Edelman, being, you can't be what you can't see. And so that has really guided me in terms of how can we create opportunities that are visible, that are tangible, that are vivid. And my second aha moment was when I moved back to New York City around 2007, 2008, and actually it's a very special time, a moment that I'm having right now, because quite an influential person in that time is in the room, Tan Shanker. I got to meet her when I launched a network of women social entrepreneurs in 2008, and I built it from about 6 women to over 1,200 within 2 years. And I kept hearing from them how hard it was to secure funding. This was around the time that, Tom Shoes, Ben & Jerry's, Honest Tea were out there making the case for doing well and doing good. And guess who got the money? Guess who got the press? White guys. Just, spoil it. Told you. And that's when I had my second aha moment, which was that society has a gendered perception on how we change the world. When a woman or femme says that they're going to change the world, the assumption is that they're going to launch a nonprofit. When a guy says that he's going to change the world, the assumption isn't that he's going to launch a nonprofit. And so that really inspired me to launch Pipeline Angels, because I was interested in engaging high net worth women and femmes and letting them know that, guess what, I'm creating a bridge from philanthropy into angel investing, and that you can change the world by investing in women-led, femme-led, for-profit social ventures. So that was like the second aha moment that inspired me to launch Pipeline Angels. The third aha moment, and this one is an important one, because we as founders, and I'm sure you will agree with this, we often get asked, why did you start? Why did you start? A potentially more powerful question, I would say, is why do we stay? And Dennis, you mentioned it, because guess what? Like social justice, we still need to do work. And so for me, in 2012, there was a very well-known white guy investor who was interviewed at a tech conference, and he was asked, what do you look for when you invest? And he simply answered, someone like me. This was before pattern recognition or pattern matching became super trendy, which they are now. And I remember, there are tons of organizations out there that are making the obvious business case for diversity. That's why we're here today, right? And I was actually interested in turning that concept on its head and saying, if we invest in what looks like us, if we invest in what's familiar, let's get more of us on the investing side, because we're probably going to be more open to investing in more of us on the startup side. And so I'm thrilled to share with you in terms of what Pipeline Angels is. It's an angel investing bootcamp. We actually create more angel investors, and our last cohort, I call them sharks in training if you watch Shark Tank, because they still haven't made an angel investment. Our last cohort, fewer than 50% were white women, over 30% were black women, and over 20% were Latinas. And they are investing in more voices. We now have over 40 portfolio companies. Over 20% of them have a black woman founder. Over 20% have an LGBTQ founder. Over 12% have a Latinx founder. And over 40% have a founder 40 years and older, because age discrimination is also an issue in the tech world. And so, just sending you the memo. And so, why is this powerful and important? Because you actually shared some, I would say, hopeful statistics at the beginning. I'm like, 40%, 23%, those are great. Let me give you a really depressing one. So according to Project Diane report, out of all the venture capital funding that has been going to Black women founders these past few years, it has been 0.2%. Not 2%, 0.2% has been going to Black women founders from VC, from the status quo. And I'm proud to share with you that in terms of what we're doing, in terms of creating an inclusive economy, our members, have invested in over 20% of our 40+ portfolio companies that are led by Black women.
Thank you. So amazing stories, and all of you are going to have a chance to ask questions and just like. Oh, thank you, Mary. Yeah. Okay. We'll make sure we have time to ask questions because there's just so much going on here. But I'll try my best to take this to the next level. And some of you already have addressed this a bit, but I want to push a bit more about your assumptions and strategy. We like to call it in some of our courses here theory of change, strategy in business schools. But what I'd like to hear from you, and let's start perhaps with Dennis on this one. Talk a little bit about the work that you're doing at Corbin Hill Food Project. What do you understand to be the obstacles that you're trying to address, and what's the strategy you're using?
Well, the obstacle really has to do with the fact that, first of all, we have very, very few voices of color talking about food when it relates to people of color. Everyone seems to be an authority on us. So that one of the important thing for us is to be able to change that conversation, change not only the conversation, but change even the vocabulary. And so it was important to us, for instance, that we attack it at many different levels. It was just simply, you ask yourself, why do you start such a social venture? And the first thing you do is try to find a way in which you can publish something in a peer-reviewed journal. Well, essentially, we know who controls all that discussion and the conversations, and we know who provides all that teaching that goes on. And so by changing that conversation, by beginning to sort of take a look at all of the assumptions, Nidhi isn't in this room, but Nidhi is a really important character in this whole thought process because we've discussed this over and over. One of the most dangerous things that I find in terms of is the sense of what we think is knowledge, what knowledge tells us and what it doesn't tell us. And I'll use a simple example in food. Like everyone knows what a CSA in this room is about. Is everyone? But most people can't tell you what it's not about. And so that's a very, very important. It has nothing to do with low-income folks. It has nothing to do with managing risk for low-income folks. It has no flexibility whatsoever to say folks on $200 a month getting SNAP should support a farmer and that they should take a risk with a farmer. So that while CSAs are wonderful things, one of the things that you have to do is think through what is the knowledge that you're being told that exists in that field and question the assumptions. So that's one of the first things that we find out very important in terms of how do we change that conversation? How do we change even the language of the conversation? So when we talk about shareholders, that has a very special kind of meaning. The second thing that I think is important about the theory of, in terms of our theory of change, is the fact that if you take a look at the food system as is right now, other than farm workers and those who work in the stores managing things, the only thing you hear about is the farmer. And yes, I do not play down the farmer. The farmer is extraordinarily important. But throughout all of this, no one hears the voice of low-income consumers. What do they want? What do they want to eat? So that, for instance, and as an example in terms of a theory of change and the kind of things that we're talking about around sovereignty, in a city of 33% of the people in this city are immigrants, it's fascinating how we all talk about local food. I don't know what that has to do with the 33% of the immigrants in this city where English isn't even their first language. And what does local mean? Redefining local becomes very important. But you walk around and you take a look at every single bag in the city that talks about food, buy local, local food, et cetera, et cetera. It has nothing to do with respecting the culture of the 33% of the folks in this city where local has a very different meaning and no one has translated that meaning to them. So that when we talk about things like creating a Callaloo project, we're talking about sovereignty in the sense of a theory of change, in terms of people within the community defining what they want to grow and what they want to eat and what they want to own in that food system. That's just one example. So this is the kind of thing that we're talking about in terms of just redefining the whole discussion, especially the vocabulary.
Let me just ask you a question, and then we'll go on to Christina. So how would you define success in the work that you're doing over time? And it may be not just your work, but others as well.
Well, our success really has to do with the changes that we see coming. For example, right now, we just got funded for something called a last mile project. Most people don't know that if you live in certain communities and you run certain institutions of a certain size, if your minimum order isn't $300 to $400, you can't get delivery of your food. You have to pay a $75 charge on top of it. So the question is, how do we make these food accessible to these groups and to the community in general? What we're doing is we're building upon the community assets. There are 7 different kinds of cab companies and drivers associations in Harlem and the Bronx, and many more in Brooklyn. How do we set up a new distribution network that's owned and wealth is created within the community and it's owned by the community? Our Callaloo project is the same thing. We're going to put together a Callaloo co-op that's going to be owned by immigrants who are going to work with our last mile delivery in terms of creating their own wealth. And so these are the examples that I can give you further examples.
So your vision of success and how are you going to get it?
So our theory of change and our strategy. I told you, when you say like what made you start this, if I could summarize what I was saying before about all these different experiences in Palestine and in my home state of Georgia and all these different things, like what made me start this is that I was angry that we were still not serving these young people, and it's true. Like there's a soft and fluffy side to me too, and I want to help people. I was pissed off that we were still not actually connecting young people to jobs, and that the real difference is usually your, socioeconomic background, or somebody gives you a pathway in, or somebody's, your uncle, or just that you get a break that somebody else doesn't have. That's just inexcusable in today's marketplace, and that's so our theory of change is that actually doesn't need to exist. We can recognize talent wherever it is, for whatever it is. And we can do so sustainably, because when you have 1.6 million open jobs, then all of those employers are out there looking for a solution. That was a big enough pool, and it was one of the most high value jobs on the marketplace. And so we knew, that was our theory of change, we could create a thriving business doing this. So we went out to talk to all kinds of high growth startups. Why can't you hire? What are the challenges? Are you set up to work in a distributed fashion? Would you consider that? And meanwhile, we looked at these extraordinary tech centers and hubs across the continent of Africa. Lagos and Nairobi, for example. Nairobi is the birthplace of mobile money. I don't know when the first time you transferred mobile money on your phone was, but the Maasai tribe is one of the oldest tribes on the planet. They have been transferring money on their mobile phones since 2007. So we have an enormous amount to learn from these tech ecosystems. So that was the theory of change. There's brilliance, and that is unrecognized because they don't have that first step, that first on-ramp into the global economy, and there are growing employers everywhere that need this kind of talent. And so one of the coolest moments since we started the company was we set out with a pilot in Lagos in May of 2014. And we used an online psychometric problem-solving logical reasoning test. Very high-level problem-solving test. Takes about 45 minutes. Most people took it on their phones. In Lagos, we recruited our first cohort of software developers So we got 700 applicants off of Twitter alone. We just literally posted it on Twitter. We didn't have a landing page. We didn't have a business card. We just said, here's the opportunity. Are you interested? 700 people applied. And then we were like, well, damn, okay, so let's, then we posted it. We put a little bit more structure into the interview process. And we reposted. We put it on Jobberman, which is sort of like monster.com in Nigeria. We put flyers at local computer science degree programs and engineering degree programs. We got 2,500 applications for that class. The test that we used, the online test, called us up and they said, what the heck is this job? You're crashing all of our systems. We've never had this many people apply. And by the way, you have 48 candidates in this pool that we consider to be in the top 2% of IQ in the world. In the world. Not in Lagos, not for this kind of a job, in the world globally. And so Jeremy and I were sort of considering what our involvement would be in said pilot, and then we were like, okay, it's time to focus entirely on this. Then we went to the community that could fund this and said, would you be interested? Look at the caliber of talent that we've found, and we have just barely started scratching the surface. And immediately, all of the VCs, all of the friends and family that we talked to that were in touch with all kinds of tech companies said, when we ask them their needs, when we ask them what they need, it's constantly software developer. No one can find software developers. So they got that, they got it that we could, actually do this, and then everyone needed this kind of talent. And so the opportunity arose. And the real opportunity is to not let these nascent tech communities make the same mistakes that we did here. And so we have 35% women software developers. Eventually it will be 50%. We have extraordinary amount of diversity. It is abundantly obvious to us that talent is gender neutral. It is, everywhere in the world, and so that's what we've set out to do, is to kind of prove that over and over again. We now have 120 partner companies across the United States, Europe, Southeast Asia, and are just continuously proving this out.
I just want to ask one follow-on question, Christina, which is when we talked earlier, you talked about a theory of change that is in addition to kind of placing talent and training talent, but there's another vision out there, and I don't want to give it away, that I'd like you just to talk about, like thinking about the African continent.
Absolutely. So we sat and thought long and hard about, what the challenges will be across the African continent over the next 10, 15, 20 years, what new clients coming on to new platforms looked like, and basically what is the biggest impact that we could possibly have. And the truth is, we could have spent 10 years recreating Berkeley's computer science degree program and putting it in Lagos or in Cape Town or Kampala. We could have done something edgier and maybe more awesome, like you guys are doing here at the New School. And we thought about that. What we experienced over and over again is it's this disconnect between the formal education system and actual employers that are cutting edge, that are showing people the way. And so our vision and what we're planning right now is that we want all of our software developers to incubate in the coolest, hottest tech companies out there, small, large, from Series C, Series D, high growth startups to very small enterprises, and then very large ones, and have that experience basically to incubate right there in the middle of it, to give their expertise and learn everything. What does it look like to set up a tech company in San Francisco, and then really use that learn by doing for 4 solid years. We also select based on their leadership and their sort of long-term view of the world, which I can go into more of how we select for that. But basically, the combination of those two things, the goal is, after 4 years, to just unleash them. We want them to be the leaders in their tech communities. We want them to be applying this, one of the beautiful things about technology is that you can apply it to agriculture in so many powerful ways. You can apply it to energy. You can apply it to the transportation challenges. The goal is to really unleash extraordinary tech talent that's incubated in the best tech companies, in the most cutting edge, the most advanced tech sectors, and then apply it to their home communities and their home challenges. So we're working on an accelerator for those that are interested in launching their own product or their own companies. That will be a huge part of our legacy moving forward. We're looking at them being the leaders, the VPs of technology and engineering, the product managers at the largest growing tech companies across the continent. We're looking at a handful of them being the ICT minister. We've got Tolu Komolafe is here right now at her client Everplans, a startup in the city, and I already refer to her as Minister Komolafe. And just planting that seed right now that they're going to be the ones, they're going to be the ethical leaders who have the in-depth knowledge of how to scale solutions through technology. And then we want to unleash them on the continent to do what they see fit to better their world, to better their communities.
Great, thanks. So Porter, tell us a little bit about your vision and your strategy.
Absolutely. So, well, first off, Andela is absolutely going to achieve that. So I'm very excited to hear that vision. I've been, of course, as you know, a huge fan of you guys, and congratulations on everything.
Totally mutual.
So, and I would imagine this is probably really similar, but the vision of Jopwell when we first started is much larger now. You kind of start working on things and you see a lot of opportunities. But when we first started the business, again, really similar. I was just very frustrated. I was very impatient, upset. I was curious, and I wanted to make impact. And when all those different types of feelings arose, I had to discover why I was feeling those things. And it was because I recognized that the opportunities that I came across, it was just because I got lucky. I got a couple of breaks here and there, and people grabbed my hand and said, do this and do that. And that shouldn't be the way that people get opportunities. And I felt that there wasn't a level playing field. And when I started to explore my curiosity and I was asking companies, well, why is there a lack of people of color in the workforce? And why do you think that there is a lack of people of color within your company? They would point to three common things, and it was generally we can't find them. I was okay. Hi. Inadequate marketing, that they didn't know how to convey their brand to an audience that historically may not have been exposed to them. And then the third thing was a lack of resources, and that they would say, while diversity recruiting is important, so is just recruiting in general. And we have to recruit the best and brightest. And that didn't sit right with me either. And so hearing those three pain points, it was like, all right, I have to do something. And out of that frustration, met my co-founder, Ryan, who sat right next to me at Goldman, in similar background. And we just started really vibing on what we were passionate about and what we wanted to solve and what we thought we could really make an impact in. And Jopwell kind of grew out of that. And now that we are doing what we're doing, and we've been doing it for the time that we've been doing it, that we just see a lot of opportunities, and the vision keeps growing, and the responsibility that we have keeps expanding. And we've been very fortunate to have a lot of amazing breaks on our startup journey, and met a ton of amazing people, have a ton of amazing investors, and so the responsibility keeps growing. And so what started out in my mind as a good, healthy, small business that can make a ton of impact through leveraging technology, the vision for what we want to do is on the same scale. So it's something that it's a humbling thing, and to your point about why we keep doing what we do is just because you see what's in front of you, and you see what you have to kind of sprint towards. And so that feeling, it constantly happens every single day. So
I was going to say, that really gets to me, the whole, we want to find the best and brightest, because I was speaking at a tech inclusion conference, and this was a woman of color in tech on stage, and doing the work to get more voices in the room, and she immediately clarified, and we're making sure not to like lower the barrier. And it was like, and I hope that you get my reference, like there's no two sides about it. There's one side. There's one correct side. And so the thing that I've been talking about, I'll start with like the PC version and then the non-PC version, which is by getting more voices in the room, we're actually raising the bar. We need to change the language. We need to change the conversation on how we're talking about getting more voices in the room. That's the PC version. Are you ready for the non-PC version? You can live tweet it. How many of you have heard about like there's a pipeline issue? Like there's a pipeline issue. So I'm like, yes, there's a pipeline issue if we're talking about how it's clogged with mediocre white men. Isn't that like a very different way to talk about it, right? Like think about it, but that's not how it's viewed. And the reason about that, and this goes back to social justice, and Dennis and I were talking about like the very important word equity versus equality, is that right now, there's like a huge group of people that are privileged, right? And so we're, using your words, leveling the playing field. And so for those of them, it feels like we're taking stuff away versus that we're leveling the playing field. And so having those conversations, those are tough conversations, and actually, if you're okay with it, I'll like set it up to like my theory of change, is I personally think, and this is very tweetable as well, if you want to be inclusive, be explicit. If you want to be inclusive, be explicit. And this really came out of, I was like, it feels like decades ago, but it was just like last year, when in Charlotte, like there was the whole in North Carolina, the anti-trans bill. And there were a lot of people that were encouraging us to launch Pipeline Angels in Charlotte. And as a cis person, I was like, well, how can we, myself, Pipeline Angels, as supporters, as allies, what can we do? What should we do? Because there were a lot of people that were protesting, they were canceling games, they were canceling concerts, etc. And I reached out to someone I knew on Twitter to ask them for feedback. Their gender pronouns are they, them. Their name is Riley Hansen, non-binary black femme. And I said, so I have this idea. I was like, I'm trying to think, what can we do? I'm like, what if we try to get as many trans women entrepreneurs to pitch in Charlotte, because then that would mean redistribution of wealth to a marginalized community. And their feedback, first of all, was like, well, wait a second. Right now, I don't feel like I might be eligible to even apply to Pipeline Angels. At that time, the language that we had in our pitch summit criteria was women, cis, and trans are encouraged to apply. And they're non-binary black femme. So they didn't really know if they were welcome in the room. And so thanks to their feedback and their challenging us, we have changed, and you've heard me use the language, and we now talk about women and non-binary femmes, anyone identifying with womanhood, cis, trans, and third gender. And I'm thrilled to share with you that this past spring we have our first non-binary femme member who told us at their gender pronouns are Z here, and told us that it was the first time that in a business setting that they had come out. Think about that. Why? Because we made inclusion explicit. And second, the other thing that I want to talk about is in terms, because I hope that you'll find this helpful. There's this TED Talk called "Be Color Brave, Not Color Blind" by Melody Hobson. How many have you heard of it? Well, like that is your homework, and you better get extra credit in those classes. Melody Hobson talks about how there's this huge conversation around that. People say, and by people I mean like white guys and some white women, probably 53% of them, will say things like, you got it, thank you. Will say things like, I don't see color, I don't see race. Like, all these, and what it does is that it minimizes, our identities. It erases the problem. And so what her TED Talk talks about is we have to be color brave. not blind, brave. We have to have these conversations. And so one of the things that we do at Pipeline Angels is we hold an unconscious bias workshop, and guess what? Riley Henson is actually the one who leads it. Imagine that, a non-binary Black femme leading an unconscious bias workshop. When you actually have the most marginalized voice or voices in the room leading the conversation, that's how you get inclusion. And that's something that is really important to me. And the other part of the theory of change, in terms of like, if you want to be inclusive, be explicit, is I just actually like, this is like new material. I like just premiered it last week. It went well, so let's see how it goes. In as much as we're talking about how hard it is for women, non-binary people, and men of color to secure capital, it's still a pseudo, that's what I'm saying, a pseudo two-way street. You know, like there's still that decision on whether or not to accept funding from certain investors. And so the question that I posed yesterday at a conference was, who do you want to make money for? Who do you want to make money for? And have you heard of Ellen Powell's Reset, like the new book that she wrote? So in that book, Ellen Powell sued Kleiner Perkins, a venture capital firm, due to sexual harassment, et cetera, et cetera. She lost because like the status quo sucks. And yet she was able to mobilize the conversations, and she's still going at it. And in the book, she talks about how there was this new CEO at Reddit that she had a conversation with, and while she was like suing Kleiner Perkins, she was encouraging him to take money from Kleiner because she could really see how Kleiner's money could grow Reddit and scale it and make an impact. And Yishan, that's the CEO's first name, was like, why would I want their money? They treated you terribly. Why would I want to work with someone who treats their colleagues terribly? And so that's what I want you to also keep in mind, and that's part of my theory of change, which is, who do you want to make money for? And sometimes it'll be harder. It's privilege, right? Because it might be easier for someone to say no than someone else. However, if you get that chance, think about who you're making money for, whether as an investor, whether as an entrepreneur, or even in terms of like work.
Can I jump in here? So it is a critical conversation to talk about who's in the room. However, if we want to change the way that all companies hire, that they think about it, you just have to prove over and over again, which we actually know, is that diverse teams build better products. They build them faster. They build them more innovatively. They build them more efficiently. Like, the best way to build a product for white dudes is to have all white dudes build it. Like, that is, if you want to expand your base of people using that, you got to get out there and get some other people on your team. And I mean, it's easy to demonize, and at Andela, we try and help these teams start conversations around diversity, which are not easy. They're not easy to start. I mean, walked in and saw a team of designers one time who was like, 7 or 8 dudes in the same company that all had like huge gnarly beards. And I just looked around, I was like, how did this happen? Like, do you guys like go out to meetups and then, all hire each other? We were kind of laughing about it. But however it happens, they know that they're not going to be able to build, the products that they want to affect, a larger group of people. So at Andela, we measure everything. We are a little bit OCD about measuring. And we measure on, technical talent, on different tech stacks. We measure on all kinds of different soft skills. And most importantly, we measure on client satisfaction. And we see no difference. When I say talent is gender neutral, that's just on gender. I mean, when we say what a success look like, it looks like every tech team out there being like, dude, our Nigerian developers are insane. They're challenging everybody else. They're teaching us new things. And then the developers from Kampala came in, male and female, and are just leveling everybody else up in all of these different ways. But we have to prove it. You have to prove it and keep saying over and over again, the reason why you should hire is because women make damn good software developers. That's why you should hire, because it is a smart business decision for you to do so. And I'm sure you're probably measuring as well.
And it's been proven. 2015
Yes.
McKinsey. I mean, time and time
over
again.
and over.
Yeah.
A couple of comments in terms of inclusive. I think, quite frankly, when you start dealing with the issue of the racial makeup of your own organization, you really have to be very intentional. It's not about just being inclusive, it's being very intentional. And there's so many different levels of being intentional. You know, I'm an immigrant to the country, coming from Trinidad at the age of 14, 15. And, you know, one of the things that disturbs me the most is the fact that finding a native-born black to hire, many people don't even put that on their criteria in terms of how they're looking at racial equity, racial equality in terms of their own organizations. In this rather diverse, immigrant-filled community, which I support, I'm part of, at the same time I ask the question, you know, where are native-born blacks in this whole puzzle in terms of what the organizations look like? Secondly, I think that, quite frankly, if you really want to start to have a conversation, you literally have to start with your own staff in terms of what the composition of that staff would be. So that we have a very small staff of 6 people, but 3 of them are bilingual. And that makes a heck of a difference when we walk into a community to have a conversation. The next thing about conversations is you have to really be very careful about this. It's a misused word. Most people have wonderful conversations, but quite frankly, they're not interested in shifting power. And once you start pushing the conversation towards shifting power, the conversation ends. Very nicely, and we have to continue this conversation, but it ain't going anywhere.
I'm glad you brought that up, Dennis, because the other thing, in terms of one of the things that we do at the Unconscious Bias Workshop, is one of the things that I say is, in women's spaces specifically, I'm like, who's the white man in the room? It's white women. And so the reason that I say that is because we need to be careful at perpetuating systems that are just societally based. And so if we are aware and we call it out, you know, like, hey, actually, if you take out guys from an equation, who then has the highest, you know, like, amount of power in that dynamic? It's white women. Then we're having that conversation aloud, and it's not about like eliminating biases. It's about being aware of them and then doing something about it. In terms of hiring, I'm so glad you brought that up. So in terms of our team, we have a queer, Black Filipina, non-binary, Black femme, a straight Latina, not me, for diversity. And I was like, what other identities and what other more voices are there? Because we can always, you know, we can do better. And this is something that has come up at a lot of diversity and tech conferences, which is disability. Disability gets left out of the conversation. And so we had like a part-time opportunity, and I wrote a short tweet and across social media channels, and I was like, part-time paid opportunity in search of connecting with people of color who are deaf and or hard of hearing. And I actually got a DM, and Anissa Flowers came on board, and she is now our scheduling coordinator. She is graduating from college this fall. She's based in San Diego. She's a young Black queer woman who's deaf. And we just had like our team meetup where we work remotely maybe last month, and I was like so excited. I had hired a Black woman interpreter for like our team dinner, and that's how I found out that like most of ASL interpreters are white women. And I was like, yes, we were at a woman-owned restaurant, you know, because that's another way of thinking about inclusivity and inclusion, which is like, where is your pocketbook going? Where are you eating? What books are you recommending? What doctors are you referring? And accountants. And because the white guys are referring white guys to each other. And oftentimes I see that more voices, we're not referring more voices to each other. And that's something that we could be doing. And then the day after, she tells me, oh, that wasn't a deaf-friendly restaurant. And it turned out because it had like as Khloe Kardashian would say, it had romantical lighting, and it was not necessarily a round table, you know. And so these are things that hadn't been part of the conversation, right? And so like we are learning. And I actually shared this with Ellen Powell when I was interviewing her for her book. And I was like, well, let's talk about best mistakes. Let me tell you a recent one I did. And something that she said, which was really compelling and I wanted to share with you was, you know what? She felt comfortable enough telling you that it hadn't been a deaf-friendly restaurant. And that says something about the culture, that someone, a colleague, a teammate, can speak up and can feel comfortable giving you feedback. That says something about the culture and about the trust that you're building, because sometimes we're not going to get it right the first time. We're going to need to learn how to make the environments more inclusive. So, that's my hope for you and my encouragement, that we're not going to get it right sometimes the first time. However, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open up to Q&A. I just want you to imagine 5 to 10 years from now, and how do you imagine amplifying or your impact? And I use the word amplify because we can do that in different ways. We can be individual leaders with a strong voice, having these kinds of tough conversations with other leaders. We can do research that changes the way we understand a matter. We can scale organizations. So I'm interested in, or we can influence other organizations. So what are the ways you think you will be amplifying your work? Where do you hope to be, and what do you hope to see in 5 to 10 years through your organization or otherwise?
I'll take a shot at that. Since I've been dreaming about it every day, and I have no more gray hairs to get. Most of you talk about food justice. You talk about social justice. You can't have food justice unless you have land justice. It is not part of the ongoing conversation. Black farmers in the 30s owned 10 million acres of land. Now they own less than 1 million acres. Loss of power, loss of wealth, and what needs to be changed, and that conversation needs to be elevated. And I hope 10 years from now that we have contributed to making that an issue in which land becomes a really important piece. We're doing something at Corbin Hill that I think is consistent with our values. I wouldn't say radical. We have a 95-acre farm, and in the next 2 to 3 years, we're turning it over to the community, so that the community will be able to own it, make decisions about how they want to use that land. And we see this as a very important symbolic gesture. That's the beginning of a movement in which numbers of people, who knows, some people may want to contribute 40 acres to some of the folks of color. Nobody got that? All right. If you want to contribute 40 acres and a mule, go ahead. All right? But my whole sense of it is that, we have 15 families in this, 11 families in this entire country that own 15% of all the land in this country. It's unjust and unfair that someone should have more buffaloes on their farm or miles of farms than the Indians had at the time when they were raising buffaloes. That's how gross it is in this country when we talk about land justice. And so the whole idea of wealth and power around land is a very important piece around food justice. Not even the young whites who are trying to go into farming can afford to buy any land. So what we're talking about is not just what the impact will be in terms of land justice around those of color, but it's also an impact in terms of many of the young people that I run into, 99.9% of them white, who would like to be able to become farmers and to get into the food movement, but quite frankly, they haven't even viewed it yet as an issue of land justice. And I'm hoping that 10 years from now, this is part of the conversation.
To amplify our current work into the future. So I envision a world where Andela is synonymous with extraordinary talent in Africa, where companies don't even think about who to hire when they need a great software developer. I envision a world where the workforce is distributed. It is incredibly diverse. It is much, much, much more equitable. It values talent and grit and persistence wherever it is. Andela, we are working every single day to make it the most efficient, mission-driven company in the world, and to have thousands of developers across the African continent and beyond. I want to employ tons and tons of other Andelans, and I hope that they're out there building companies. I know that they will be launching companies. And so 5 years out, I hope to see a handful of companies that are really, really scaling. 10 years out, I hope most of our software developers are going to our Andela graduates companies that are snatching them up, and that they're helping us to continue to scale the company into their home companies and their home countries. Those are some of my hopes and dreams. Yeah.
For us, I would say in 5 to 10 years, 5 to 10 years, that U.S. companies can no longer point to reasons as to why they can't recruit people of color. And if Jopwell can be a solution for all the different things that they can come up with as to why they can't achieve it, if we can be that solution, then we've succeeded here, and then we can take that around the world and be the platform for the most underserved communities around the world, and however each country defines that, for us to be the platform to make sure that companies there also don't have an excuse as to why they can't find those people.
Yeah, I'd say wealth creation in terms of, for our portfolio companies, that they then are able to be the friends and family round for other entrepreneurs in their own communities. There are two other things that I do want to talk about, which is these reports that, Christina, you mentioned, they've existed for decades. And some of them had actually better numbers, especially when it comes to like women coders. And it's not working. Like the status quo, no matter how many reports out there, like they're still not doing it. And so what I want to acknowledge in terms of what you both are doing is that it's not just enough to like push the system and change the system, it's also important to disrupt the system. And so I'd say that if we can at least consider policy changes, things that are like laws, et cetera, because those numbers, those stats, they're depressing and they're getting lower. And so just, like that's just one thing that I wanted to share. And in terms of, I was like, remind me to, if I do not showcase the shirt, remind me. Actually, I'll just do it first because otherwise I'll remember. So in terms of the future, I want to leave it with this shirt, which says, "The revolution will be intersectional." I see the photographer, wait a second. Here it is. There. And I got it from For Harriet, which is a media startup. And they were launched by Kimberly Foster, a Black woman founder, and it's for Black women. And the reason I say this is because we really need to think about the different identities and make sure that we are not thinking about it in silos. It has to be systemic. When I go speak at women's events, oftentimes it's like white women. When I go to speak at LGBTQ events, oftentimes it's white guys, but guess what? They're gay. When I speak at, just think about it, right? Like it often happens like that. And so really wanting to push back and honor Kimberly Crenshaw, who is the one who coined the word intersectionality. And then the other thing that I'd hope that we do is that we stop saying 50-50 gender parity, because that erases non-binary people. So the next time that you're like, oh my gosh, we achieved 50 gender parity, just remember, like, where does that leave space for non-binary people?
Thank you. I am now going to open it up to all of you. There are 2 mics here, and you can start sharing your thoughts and questions. Try to make your questions pithy so that we can hear from the panelists.
Yeah. Hi, is this on? Yep, okay. My name is Smel Maurice. I am a media management student here at the New School. My question for the panel is, as someone who has run a startup in the media industry, I'm curious to know how are some strategies that you can inform about navigating idiosyncratic power differentials when we talk about an inclusive economy. How do you strategize around power differentials when it comes to dealing with investors, for example, primarily investors? Are there any kind of strategies that you employ, or even ideas in regards to that? Thank you.
Well, sure. So there's a lot of strategies. Specifically for funding. So context. We've raised about $12 million. We went through Y Combinator's, an accelerator program on the West Coast. A lot of big VCs have invested in our company. And for me, being a first-time entrepreneur and a person of color, sitting across the table from names that you've heard of, it's a really interesting dynamic. And so, but what I found to work really well for me is that I was the expert, and like I don't care what that person tells me, they do not know what I'm like trying to build that job well and why it's necessary. And so when they're questioning and we're having that back and forth dialogue, I was literally educating very well-known partners at these VC firms about what it's like, what the problems are, why we're going to be successful, and I own the conversation. And anytime you can own the conversation, kind of let the pitch deck close, and it's just a dialogue back and forth, and they get entranced with the story, you win. And when you go across from a VC, a lot of it is that struggle and that battle, that who has the upper hand, who's educating whom in that conversation. And so what I found just to be helpful is that I knew what I was talking about, and they didn't. They were asking me questions, so I was giving them answers. And that dynamic was a really powerful dynamic to be in. But it's a mindset. You got to go in there with that mindset. And that worked well for me.
Can I add to Porter's piece, even though mine is in food? I would say you're absolutely correct. You have to own that conversation. You have to own that vocabulary. And you have to be, for instance, we talk about community engagement. And I walk into rooms. There's nobody there who's ever been engaged in a community. They can talk about the community, but they've never been engaged in it. So when I walk into that room, whether it's a funder or not, and I start talking about engaging the community, it has a completely different authoritative sense about it that I am educating you.
I hope that you have the option, or that you meet enough people to really find funders that are values aligned, and to be able to start a conversation around just truly shared values, and no matter what that person looks like. But the next step is, I would say, it's more than just informing. It's experiential. So all of our major investors have been on the ground in either Lagos or Nairobi. We just launched in Kampala, but they'll get there. And so I can't describe to them that we need to. It's a huge, large operation in Lagos because I need a $20,000 generator. And then I need a person to come and service that generator every single day because it's a city of 17.3 million that's run on generators. That is more of an investment than they would have made up front, and that they just truly wouldn't understand unless we said, come and experience this talent, on your own. Come see it and feel it and spend time with us before you consider us, giving money. If you share something, if we connect in some way, then come see and experience what I'm telling you about. That has really worked for us to be able to start a much longer journey and conversation with people that are totally values aligned. And I can't say enough positive things about our investors. We've raised $42 million. They're on a long-term journey with us.
And actually Google who's come to see the work that Andela has done. Trust me.
Yeah, so I'm more like Representative Maxine Waters, and I reclaimed my time, so I don't deal with white guys. It took you a little bit later than that other group. So I'm actually creating angel investors who get more voices. I'm actually bringing women, non-binary femmes, particularly women of color, in the room. And oftentimes what happens is that the women and femme entrepreneurs, I will say a couple of them have broken down because it's the first time that they've actually ever pitched to a room full of women and femmes, and additionally to that, not just white women. And so that's really where we're adding the value, because it's like, hey, if there's a lot of times we're not being heard, we're not being seen, we're being ignored, and right now we're being more than usual literally erased. So it's so much about us seeing each other. So that's I will say I do have three, because I do believe in being actionable, three specific tips, for entrepreneurs, because I judge a lot of pitch events, and I often see that particularly entrepreneurs of color and particularly white women and femmes aren't putting themselves out there. They're like, cross the T's, dot the I's, I'm not ready yet. And so what I like to say is that pitching isn't a zero-sum game. Even if you don't win that business plan competition, I don't know if the new school has some events, the feedback that you're gonna get from the judges and the potential connections, maybe a judge is not interested in your business, however, they might know someone who is. So just think about, one of my favorite definitions of angel investing is that smart money. It's human capital, that expertise, that skill set. It's the social capital, the connections and networks, and in addition to that, it's obviously the financial capital. The second thing I will say is that make sure in your team page, make sure to have a team, because I often meet entrepreneurs who come from, who are not, cis straight white guys, who are one-person founders. And so they're out there looking for funding. And the thing is that investors want to, quote unquote, de-risk the investment. And so if they don't see that you already have a team with different skill sets that will actually take you to the next level, then they're like, why am I betting on you if you don't already have people who are betting on you? And sometimes what's interesting is that those informal advisors, et cetera, they do exist. They just somehow don't make it to the team page. So just make it explicit there. And then the final thing I would say is do your research. I often meet so many entrepreneurs that are pitching and they have not read the bios of the investors, and they have not done the research, and they don't realize that, to your point about finding a point of commonality, oh wow, we went to the same school, or we played the same sport, or we watched the same TV show. You can find that out on Twitter, right? You can find something that will make that connection happen, and so it'll stop being like a you and them, and it'll start feeling like an us.
Thank you.
If there are lots of you out there that are in that position that are making the pitch, come find us afterwards. It's really tough. It's a tough and it's a harrowing experience, and you gotta do it, and you gotta get outside of that deck and be yourself. And so we can help you talk about ways to do that.
I'm too tall for this. Okay, hi, my name is Carmella Wilkins. I'm a senior at Parsons in the integrated design program. And my question's a little bit simple, but how did you find the courage to overcome your doubts, if you had any?
I'm an
great
optimist. I'm sorry. I could go to bed every night saying, if I looked at everything that went on in the course of the day, that there's really no reason to get up. And guess what? I am so excited to kick the butt the next day. I'm serious. My wife says to me, I don't know where you get that energy from. I'm glad we commute in terms of our relationship, because I don't think I could take it 7 days a week.
So I had a relatively, well, I guess someone might call it a safe or a traditional path before starting Andela. I was, the black sheep of the family traveling off to crazy places, but I had the honor of being able to work with Michelle. We worked for former President Clinton at the Clinton Global Initiative. I worked for the MasterCard Foundation, some more, all in the same, kind of all vectors pointing in that same direction of education and employment. But within the safer confines of larger places, even though I didn't believe that people were doing it the best way. And then, truthfully, my truthful answer to your question is I got my heart ripped out. I had a horrible, thought it was the relationship that I'd be in forever. And I failed horribly at this thing that was super public. And everybody knew it. And I took a long pause and a lot of deep breaths. And then I spent a lot of time alone saying, okay, I'm no longer afraid of what happens if I were to fail publicly. That just happened, and guess what? You're still alive. You still got a pulse. And so what do you want to do? I kind of got this opportunity to like back the universe into a corner and say, what is the very specific problem that you've seen over and over again, and how would you address it if you did it most efficiently and most effectively? And I was just not afraid to fail anymore.
When I was leaving, my parents told me that I was literally going to die if I left finance, and that like you're going to die. And so so that was awkward, and to be, you know, like I love my parents and like they're my mentors and my best friends and all that. So to do something that's so unnatural as your parents telling you this is like the worst decision you can possibly make, in that you've never done recruiting, you're non-technical, you've never started a company, and you're going to leave a dream job to go and build something that has all those three things with another person who also is non-technical, never done recruiting. They're like, that's just a bad decision. And anyway, and so, but when you have that thing inside that tells you that this is the right thing, and you know, you live life once, and for me it was, if I were to have passed away, like I would not have rest in peace doing what I was doing. And so it was like this morbid thing of like, I have to do something different. And so that was what enabled me to kind of take that leap, if you will.
So I have two I love quotations. Obviously, I hope you would have realized by now. And the first one is by Nicole Kidman. Surprise! And it's something along the lines of, I don't want to ever regret not having been a little bit braver. And I think that's such a cool way of thinking of it. Like, just any time that you actually don't risk it, sometimes it's like, I should have done that. And so, like, why not be a little bit braver? And the other one is by Ava DuVernay. And actually talking about land, Queen Sugar is such a powerful example in terms of like that land conversation there. And she said at South by Southwest a few years ago, and I got to see her live, she's like, if you're when you find your lane, there's no traffic. Isn't that cool? Like when you're in your lane, there's no traffic. And then, so those are like the easy ones. Like now I'm gonna get heavy duty, so I'm glad you're still sitting. So a few years ago, I was honored by Cosmopolitan for Latinas. They had a Fun and Fearless award, and so we had to like come up with remarks. And I was like thinking, when was the first time that I remember really being fearless? And it kind of brought me to, I think I was in high school, and my mom's an alcoholic, and I remember like we were having an argument, and she was drunk in the afternoon, and I kind of like, I physically like stopped her and said like, no, you can't do this anymore. And so each time, you know, like when I think about that, you know, like I stood up to my mom. I found my voice, which had actually been like pretty quiet because, and I don't know if any of you have experience with dealing with alcoholism, walking on eggshells. That's what my childhood had been. And I finally spoke up. And so in that sense, whenever I think, you know, like I've been cheeky and I've been talking about like these white guys because why not? And I'm like, because you know why? Because like that fearlessness that I had to speak up to my mom as that kid, like all these other scenarios don't really match up to that. And so if now that, like after finding my voice, I'm like, yo, I'm gonna use it. And so that's, you know, like I don't wish on anyone that aha moment that I had. However, I'm for sure going to leverage it because it just feels, it feels like I can do a lot of good with it.
Thank you.
Do something because we're going to run out of time. We're going to do 2 questions at a time, and then you can choose among those questions, okay? So Charles, why don't you start?
Hi, my name is Charles Allison. I'm a faculty member here. I'm in the Public and Urban Policy Department at Milano, and I chair the Management, Leadership, and Entrepreneurship program at BPATS. Quick question for whoever wants to answer this. Knowing what you know today, can you share with us, knowing what you know today, with the benefit of hindsight, what do you wish you had known a year ago? So knowing what you know today, with the benefit of hindsight, just 1 year ago, what do you wish you had known as an entrepreneur?
So hold on to that question. Maybe a second one, and then you can choose what you want to do.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay, yeah, you can. Sorry. Yeah, my name is Marlon Jenkins. I am the CEO and founder of Nature, which is a broadband company I created to provide free and low-cost internet access to underserved communities. And my biggest issue is that I've been looking and searching for, you mentioned like-minded individuals in funding. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard, why do you want to invest in doing something for that group of people? So what I would love to hear from you is, how did you find like-minded people? Because it's been very, very difficult. We've been working on this for about 6 years now. And what we found in like-minded people is government, which, as you know, is a pain in the arse. And it changes constantly. So if you can give me any insight on that, I would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
So 2 questions. What do you wish you knew today, a year ago? And how do you find capital and in the right places? So choose whatever you want.
Well, I come
or
from a
both.
different generation, so I have a different answer to your question about finding capital. I came out with a group of people in the 60s with shared values. I have roommates who were investors now, who paid my rent in the 60s, my $35 a month rent in the 60s, because I was doing work in which Bayard Rustin would never pay me a nickel. And they all knew this. So they knew what I was doing. They knew they shared values. We get together. As a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago we flew up to Maine and got together for a morning with one of our roommates. So this piece of shared values, not just from the folks you grew up with in the 60s, but almost everyone that I was involved with, come out of that 60s, 70s era in which they understood. For instance, none of the people that invested in us knew a damn thing about farming. Okay? Other than the fact that I says, look, we've got to leave something behind and do something for the community. And you ain't going to make a dime on this. You don't make money on when you're talking about food for those who need it most. The margins are so slim, it becomes even non-existent when you do that. But it was a question of shared values. And they were willing to take that risk. And essentially, they're the group that also has now agreed to turn the farm over to the community. So I would look for people with the shared values. From my era, that was easy. And it's not the government. The government and foundations do not fund revolutions.
Especially this government.
Okay, so one thing I wish I had known a year ago, that it's okay to say no. I felt like when I was starting the business, I would reach out to a lot of people, and people who didn't get back to me, I was annoyed. And so I said, okay, when people reach out to me, I'm gonna say yes every time. And so so I said yes every single time, and it became the biggest distraction, and I just was becoming worse in my job. And so I have systems in place now that prevent me from having to say yes, and that's been something I wish I had known earlier.
Yeah. And so in terms of your question, I'd say you're in the right room. And oftentimes, I know a lot of entrepreneurs, you leave, we had a really great time, and you leave and you go about your business and your day, and you don't actually reconnect with people you met today. So this is actually another homework. Like, make sure to exchange business cards or LinkedIn's or whatever, your email, with someone new that you met today. Because we often don't translate into the long term these ephemeral moments that we're having right now, number one. And number two is, and this is where like applies to all of you, which is another issue, another pet peeve I have, like when entrepreneurs pitch, is like, we are so revolutionary and so disruptive, there's no competition, we're first to market. And so if you actually do your homework and you do your research, they might not be exactly the same thing that you're doing, which is why you're actually like creating it, right? However, showing those 5 to 10 players in the market and how your product or service differentiates itself is going to showcase to the investors that you actually know how you're adding value and how you're different. And here's the special part to your question. You can also potentially find out who invested in those companies. And so that gives you an idea of some of the players who might be interested in potentially either investing in you, or at least gives you a sense of the market and the ecosystem. And then the other thing is social media exists now in a way that I could follow people without actually, I could, people are, if you have done some light tweeting, and I hope you have, there were people who were able to follow our conversation today and be able to connect with some of you who live tweeted, and you might be able to follow some of us later, etc., in a way that before it was impossible. So even thinking about the online as a really great way and a tactic to meet people, #ImpInv, which means impact investing. Find those hashtags and find those conversations that are happening online, so that then you can then know where to go offline to connect with more people.
One of the things I've learned from our software developers is a meme that I'll give you, which is yo-yo blank. You own your own whatever it is. You own your own learning. You own your own learning loop or cycle is the thing that we kind of harp back and forth on. And so as an entrepreneur and a founder, in the early days, you level up on the craziest thing, how to incorporate in Mauritius and what's involved in that, and literally how to service a generator myself in the back of an office in Lagos. Just stuff that you never thought that you would learn. You sort of do the mental push-ups to get you to this thing, and you're constantly pitching and telling other people, and then you'll step back and just be like, but I'm trapped in this team, and she's passive aggressive, and he's always, knows the answer, and, no one listens. And you forget to just sort of own your own existence in every space that's really bothering you. So what I wish I had known a year ago is when I wake up 3 times in the middle of the night, I'm blocked. Something is blocking me. I'm confused, or there is something that is just hindering my own ability to learn and move forward and learn and move forward. And so to apply the exact same mental push-ups that I put towards how the heck do you incorporate something and across the other side of the world to that same thing that when you're most stressed, when you're having a flight or fight response, that's when you need to harness your best judgment and go back to how you did it, at things that other people would consider to be really tough.
So I want to follow up on the questions that were just asked. Christina, can I just ask you to also say something about capital raising, because you've done a pretty good job at that. And then I want to actually loop back and ask the others about a follow-on to Charles's question. So Christina.
Yeah, and so will you just clarify, is the gentleman there, it's an internet, what does the organization do again?
Provide free and low-cost internet access to underserved communities.
Okay, and you're looking for any, a specific kind of capital or non-government funding is basically, okay. I feel you. It's interesting. When I've talked to international audiences, and they're like, "What can we do to help?" And I'm like, "Lay the cable, lay the fiber cable anywhere you build a road, put it out there." That to me is just, it's just so obvious now. Okay, so the right room and the right funders. I think you really have to kind of read between the lines of what's out there and do it just as if you're networking for a job. You don't choose 100, you choose 5, and you choose you find whatever else they've invested in. You look for the common denominators, either their theory of change, by connectivity, by what the founders speak about, and I think you go after those 5, and you get real conversations with them, and once again try and have them experience what you experience. And then when you get to somebody that will give you a real answer, which is well, Porter, it was great to see. Yeah, we'll be in touch. When somebody's like, no, I can't invest in you, I can't give you money, then you just say, why? What would I change? How would this pitch look differently? How can this grant application or whatever it is, what specifically does it need to look like to look good to you? And there are people out there that will really give you that answer, and then gravitate towards them and go back to them and be like, great, I'm going to go do that, and I'm going to come back to you, and can we have another conversation?
One strategy around food, because of the nature of food and finding investors who want to finance serving low-income folks, is I've moved away from looking for investors, and I'm now dealing with 6 people around bequests.
So as we bring this to closure, I want to ask if each of you can reflect on yourself as leaders, because I mean entrepreneurs are are leaders. They're leaders in their organizations. They're leaders in their fields. They use their voices as leaders. What have you learned about yourself that you draw upon to be an effective leader? And how do you hope to continue to develop as a leader? What are you looking to continue to develop? And how do you advise people in the room to think about leadership?
I'll go in super short because it's time to wrap up, right? Maya Angelou, it's quotable, tweetable. Are you ready? I didn't do any better because I didn't know any better. Now that I know better, I do better.
Thanks, Natalia.
So I've always played sports my entire life. So I've always been used to, being a captain of a team. And for me, it was always comfortable to manage up until about 12 to 13 people. And then once we crossed that threshold, it became a little bit awkward for me to find my own voice. And in that, I couldn't be best friends with everybody, but I couldn't kind of sit away from the other 13 people right there. And so it was this really interesting dynamic of trying to figure out how to find my own voice and, while having a small team that we still have. But one of the things I feel that has enabled me to continue to lead is to be more vulnerable and just acknowledge when I don't know things and just to be transparent about that. And so if somebody says, well, I wish it was this way, or I wish it was that way. And the simple answer is, I appreciate that feedback. Like, we can make that happen. And it's just a lot easier when you're not trying to act like you know everything. And we've been fortunate to hire really smart people. And so I value everybody's opinions. And I think the biggest thing of being a leader is people need to want to follow you. And I think the best way to go about that is to just, kind of take the criticism and you take it and you deal with it and you make sure that is constructive and you move forward. And so I've kind of always embraced that.
Plus 1,000 to vulnerability of leaders. I think that a lot of times we get caught up in, I want to found this thing, or I want, my name on the, the door and the thing. Like, find a thing that you wake up, a problem that you're obsessed with, that you can do for every single day of your life for 5 years, not one day less, at least 5 years. Like, find that obsessive thing. And then people follow leaders. They don't follow titles. Like, if you're making that thing happen, they will, they will just be attracted to that thing. It will just be contagious. One of the best, most powerful things that we've done at Andela is sort of give that all away. We were like, every one of you is an owner. Feel like it, own it. We're not gonna be able to scale this. It's not a business, it is a mission with a business. It's both of those things. And unless, everybody in Kampala feels like they are the launching that thing in Kampala, it's never gonna work. I can't, replicate me and put it everywhere. So we've, if you're that passionate about a thing, then bring people around you that find that thing to be contagious and give it to them, and give away ownership and find a way to make them feel just as connected to that thing as you are.
I was trained as a mathematician, and so one of my biggest problems that I have is I understand all the assumptions, and most times I don't state them. And people think I talk in shorthand. And so one of the things that's really important to me in terms of being able to lead with my team is my staff keeps saying, you left out a paragraph. And so just being able to, the ability to say this to me very clearly, and now really putting me in check over the last 2 or 3 years has really made a huge difference in terms of my ability to communicate with them. The other side of it is to demonstrate that you can do things. I've done everything in a small organization to that extent. I never recall the first conference I went to when I was recruiting at a NOFA conference. There might have been 1,000 people there, 8 people of color. Not a single person took an application to work for Corbin Hill. 7 years later, now that we've demonstrated this in terms of what is possible, we now had 1 opening and we had 150 applications. And I think that that's important, that you be able to demonstrate and be able to show that you can do what it is you are going to do, and that you've been leading folks to do this.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's been a really wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you. So what's going to happen now is that Elizabeth's going to give us just a quick set of remarks about what the Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative is and how you can become a part of it. And then we're going to have a reception with beverages, including wine, I believe, and food. So, Elizabeth?
Sure. So good evening. I'm Elizabeth Werby. I, along with Michelle, am leading the Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative here at the New School. I hope you all enjoyed this evening's panel discussion as much as I have. Thank you all for being here and sharing your insight and perspective on this important topic. I'd briefly like to thank all the people who helped make this evening's event such a success. First of all, I'd like to thank Francisca Severina, who's a master's student in the Strategic Design and Management program here, and a part-time student program manager. She really did the lion's share of organizing leading up to this event, so thank you. And also, along with her, Adam Shagani, who's just joined the team as another part-time student program manager, also from Parsons, the same program. I'd like to thank the volunteers who helped out tonight. I'd like to thank Alexis Watts, if she's still here. This is part of the Nth Degree series, which is, we host lots of public programs here at the New School. We hope you'll come back for more. So before, as Michelle mentioned, before inviting you to join us for a light reception here, I'd like to just briefly talk about two program components for the Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative. We're very excited to be launching this with support from the Kauffman Foundation as a way of supporting the inspiring work of our students and prospective students. Our mission, as you've heard, is to support early-stage entrepreneurial leaders in developing the mindsets, the skills, and the sense of purpose that really they need to thrive in our rapidly changing world. Two programs in particular that I'd like to briefly highlight that may be of interest to students as well as prospective students and alumni tonight are the Venture Lab. The Venture Lab is a pilot program. It's a new semester-long course that will be taught by Jen Vandermeer, who's over there, this spring. The deadline for applications is this Wednesday, October 4th, and the Venture Lab is intended to support teams of students across the university in developing financially sustainable ventures with the potential for scalable social impact. What's unique about this course is that in addition to validating their business model hypotheses and weekly class meetings, the course will also include opportunities for funding and mentorship from seasoned entrepreneurs. So it's a very unique opportunity. And then secondly, the Graduate Fellowship is also a new initiative we're piloting under this umbrella. It's a 2-year merit-based scholarship and cohort experience for high potential leaders from diverse backgrounds who are interested in doing a master's program here at the New School and are committed to creating positive social change through entrepreneurship. To learn more about the fellowship, I'm just going to suggest that you look at the Impact Entrepreneurship website, which is up here on the screen, as well as in your program. That includes more information about eligibility criteria and priority deadlines and that kind of thing. And then lastly, I would love, as Michelle mentioned, to invite all of you here tonight to get involved in supporting this important work. If you're interested in serving as a mentor or an advisor, you'll find a brief interest form on the Impact Entrepreneurship website as well. We are also seeking professional service partners if you have expertise in certain area like legal issues or accounting or communications. And of course, we're always looking for financial support as well. So I'll end off with that pitch. If you have any questions, if you didn't have a chance to speak with any of us from the Impact Entrepreneurship team or any of the panelists, please come find us. We hope you enjoy this evening's event, and we'll have a chance to stick around and chat some more as you enjoy something to eat and drink. Thank you for coming.